This is Red Dog Terrain. Welcome back to the shed. Today we're building a kite-shaped house. Leaf over at Devs and Dice had a video about how most scale models are square and full of right angles. As I looked around my shop, I realized he was right. So he built a square with the corners cut off like a squished hexagon. Inspired by him, I made this kite-shaped building. I started by cutting out kites that I had printed out. I then pinned them to cheap dollar store foam board and cut out those shapes. Then I cut up some walls and glued them together, making sure the angles fit right. I also used some scraps of thick XPS foam to support the corners. I glued on the top, which I unintentionally cut small, but you can't tell when it's all done. With more scraps and the smaller kite piece, I made the top of the roof. Well, not really the roof, like a mid-roof. The next part was tricky. I laid down the building and did my best to draw lines where the mid-roof would be. It sure didn't line up perfectly though, partly because of the middle piece being too small, and partially because I was a little sloppy. I use hot glue for this part. Hot glue isn't the best, and it can sure make a mess, but I didn't want to wait for the PVA to dry and risk something slipping off or sliding down. Oh, I did a smart thing here. I coated the whole thing in the secret sauce, which is just black paint and Mod Podge, about halfway through the build. That way, when I laid the bricks and shingles down later, the dark recesses and shadows were already there. I wouldn't be trying to jab my paintbrush into crevices to cover up white foam later. I laid out more scraps of dollar store foam board and rolled over them with aluminum foil. This gives it a stony texture. Using this foam, they're all the same thickness, which is fine, but it makes the brickwork more uniform, and therefore it gives it a higher quality look, a newer building look. Once they were all textured, I ran them through the Proxon. This of course could be done with a ruler or knife, but while I had it out, I figured I would use it. While I do that, I'm also going to ask you to give the video a like, or leave a comment, or better yet, tell a friend. Thanks. I turned the strips of foam sideways and ran them through again, and with that, I've got a ton of bricks. Even though I textured them before, I felt it wasn't enough, so I tossed them in this old paint can with some stones and shook them vigorously. I thought about making a rock tumbler, but for bricks made of foam. An old paint can, some PVC, maybe a door handle. I think I could make it happen. Using hot glue, I laid down a solid row of bricks. I like to use hot glue in the first row. That way, they are quickly adhered, and I can begin putting on the next layers with PVA, which is going to need more time to cure. So far, the hardest and most interesting part of this build is cutting the angles correctly. With square buildings, it's all right angles. With this kite-shaped building, I have strange or sharp cuts, and they don't always line up perfectly. You may not see them in the final shots, but there are definitely gaps here and there. To cover up some of those gaps and add some visual interest, I cut L-shaped strips of foam. I gave them a wood grain texture using my gnarly wire brush. I did my best to make the angles line up, but I see my mistakes and I know how to improve on them for next time. And by that, I mean just cover them up with more foam and paint. I glued on the wooden beams and then pinned them in. I found myself doing this a lot on this build, pinning and waiting, pinning and waiting. Now we move on to the shingles. I set my prox on at a 1/2 inch and drew lines also at a 1/2 inch. Being able to use the bar as my guide for the depth made it so much easier. I turned them sideways and cut the strips into thin slivers. This is 1/2 inch foam, and I was able to get about 4 strips for each piece. Just like my bricks, the first layer is put on with hot glue, and the rest go on with tacky glue. Same beams on the edge of the roof. I made a flat roof and added another layer. Unfortunately though, I forgot to film that part. I'm not really sure what this layer even is. Maybe an attic or a lookout? I just knew it needed something. It needed more height. I wanted this layer to be wooden. The building is stone, shingles, and wood. So this is like the third act of a play. Let me take a moment to thank the band Aya for the continued use of their music. Check out their latest album, 5. I think my favorite song on the album is Madre de los Suspiros. Link to their Bandcamp in the description. After a coat of the secret sauce, which is just of course black paint and Mod Podge to protect it and add shading, this is where we're at. I would paint the shingles a bright orange and the stone a dark gray with a few brown bricks picked out. The wood parts would get a coat of light brown. The excited toy maker sipped his hot morning beverage. Remembering a few things he wanted to bring down from the attic, he put down his mug and clambered up the wooden ladder. Crates full of trinkets and treasures, baubles and bric-a-brac were stacked as high as the small space would allow. He folded his apron up and began filling it with any and everything a small child might like. Rushing down, he poured them out on the table and quickly tried to rearrange them nicely, but soon gave up. The chirping from the birds springing forth from his clock let him know it was time to open the doors. He stepped out gleefully and bellowed, "Welcome to Kiteman's cache of curios and curiosities." No one cheered. No one clapped. Once again, there was no one there at all. He went back inside, sat down at his bench, and began crafting. Maybe tomorrow someone will be waiting. Maybe tomorrow someone will want to see what he has made. I gave everything a dry brush and a real light tan. I think I overdid it here, especially on the shingles. At the end, they looked washed out and not as interesting as I had hoped. But we live and we learn, and then we gave her everything a blackwash. after an edge highlight, a doorknob, a door decoration, and glass on the windows, we're done.